You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong, happy to be back with you again today. I come to you a couple days after my first trip to Kansas City, and that's what we get to talk about to start today. So first, before we get into that, let me tell you about our sponsors, UFirst Credit Union. With your UFirst Rewards checking account, you can earn monthly reward points for buying something special for your best friend. Then you can redeem your reward points for something special for yourself. And with no monthly maintenance fees plus free ID theft protection, you can love that the UFirst Rewards checking is big on perks and peace of mind. Put your checking account to work for you so you can spend more time doing more rewarding things. It's easy rewards checking with UFirst Credit Union. Check out the full details at uFirstCU.com. All right, let's jump into this. This is another podcast talking about basketball, and man, what an interesting week last week for me. I've told you on this podcast, I was getting over a cold. I didn't sound very good on this podcast, and quite honestly, it was really tough to get through the podcast without, feeling like I needed to stop every 2 minutes. But I get to Kansas City, and I got sick again, and so that just kind of compounded on some things again. So I feel good, happy to be back and doing this. But last week, I kind of stepped in it a little bit. If you were on Twitter, you probably saw it. In fact, 1 million people saw my tweet, so that kind of shows to the level of how this grew. What happened was, I flew to Kansas City Tuesday night. My flight was delayed 3 hours because of a storm, blizzard that was taking place in Kansas City, so just trying to get there was difficult. The intended thing was my flight was going to get there right before the blizzard really hit, which, is always a good thing. But instead, my flight was delayed 3 hours. They needed to find a second pilot. And so that put us right in the heart of the blizzard. Not ideal. And I'm, I've flown a lot simply because of my job, traveling and doing all that kind of stuff. And I don't get too nervous flying. I've experienced turbulence. I've experienced some pretty crazy things. Landing in Chicago where your plane is basically sideways as you're coming into the runway with the wind that's there. But, for the most part, I don't get too nervous on flights. That's not to say there's, some turbulence that kind of jars you a little bit, but for the most part, I'm fine. This landing, however, was probably the most terrifying landing I've ever had. About 10 minutes before we're landing, the pilot gets on the PA system and tells us that we are going to try to land, and he didn't sound uber confident, right? Like it wasn't one of those things like, we got this. It was very much so putting doubt into the mind that this is going to be a very difficult landing. The winds were blowing like crazy. It's snowing. The visibility was a half a mile is what he said. I don't know what great visibility is for a flight, but, it wasn't great visibility. And so, he's trying to land this plane. And we had to kind of circle the runway a few times because it was too windy. Our flight was, moving up and down. It was shaking back and forth because of the turbulence, like pretty raucously. And, every time we'd go down, we'd drop probably, 50 feet or whatever it is. I don't know a good number on that, but you're dropping a lot. I don't know all that went into it necessarily. I do know that as the pilots do go down on the descent and they are landing, there's no more autopilot. This is all on them. And so this is where, they get paid the big bucks, so to speak, to be able to make sure that all of us are safe. And in the very end, we do land, but as we land, our plane turns sideways, and you can feel us skidding on the ice on the runway before they were able to level it out, and everything was okay. It was one of those things where everybody was looking around at each other as we're going down, nervous that this might be the last one. And considering the news of all the planes that have had problems the last little bit, maybe that intensified the problems, right? Like we didn't want to be like the plane that ended up in Canada where you flip on your the head and everything. So anyways, with that context, the reason I'm giving you that context is kind of my state of mind. Not that it really matters at this point. But anyways, we land in the middle of this blizzard, Kansas City. Look, I'm from Utah. I understand you can get pretty bad with snow and all that other stuff. So, that's not the worry to me. It was just more kind of that context. We landed at midnight. Nothing is available, and my hotel is about 30 minutes away once I get my rental car. So, getting there, the roads are terrible, having to drive there and whatever. So, I had just kind of been done with it. I was done with the frustrations that it was. Usually with these basketball tournaments, I'm heading to Las Vegas, where, it can get cold, but it's nothing like this. And, I was just kind of a little frustrated. So I was kind of in my mood at that point. So at 1:16 a.m. Central Time, so local time where I was at, I decided to tweet that, we decided to be able to have a basketball tournament in a blizzard area instead of having it in Las Vegas, essentially, was the meat of my tweet, right? And, it was more of just a reactionary tweet, me being frustrated. I didn't give any context, I didn't give anything, and it was just thrown out there, right? At 1 a.m, so very few people are going to see it. Little did I know that a lot of people were going to see it. And look, my life lives out on Twitter. I obviously put this stuff out there for the world, and I'm not ashamed of putting stuff out there, right? I don't think I've ever deleted a tweet. Maybe I have, but for the most part, whatever I put out there, it is what it is. And I stand by what I say, and that's what it is, right? So I'm not ashamed of anything that I tweet or anything like that. So if there's anybody that's like, oh man, he probably feels embarrassed about that. Nope, I don't. Just kind of, there was some context there. Well, by the next morning, by the time that I woke up, I had to cover the BYU women's basketball game that morning after getting a little bit of sleep and then having to cover that. I was kind of rocked already. But by that point, by the time I was covering the BYU game, essentially my tweet had blown up. And it only grew from that point forward till by the time that Utah played Thursday night, this had been seen a billion times, right? Okay, a million. But a lot of people had seen this tweet and reacted pretty strongly to it. In the end, there was, 300 plus responses from people messaging me, telling me how stupid I was, how bad of a decision that was to even say that Las Vegas is a destination for a basketball tournament. Kansas City is the best. I had 140 plus retweets / quote tweets. It's hard to fully capture what that is. Regardless, it was a million people that saw it and reacted to it. I was on message boards from everyone, right? Not unusual for a writer. It happens. I had fellow journalists weighing in like Dennis Dodd and Shehan Jayaraja. Both people that I interact with frequently, people that I talk to. But, it added to it where they, basically said that Kansas City is the GOAT of basketball tournaments. So, granted, I was going to the women's basketball tournament, and unfortunately in this world, the women's basketball tournaments just don't generate the same kind of allure that the men's do. I get it. The men's has been, consistent for years, and it's been a great product and everything. Unfortunately for the women's, they just don't get the same support. And so I unfortunately didn't get to experience what's happening this week, where the men's basketball tournament is taking place in Big 12 country. Me and the BYU rider, we decided to split. I decided to take the women's because I was expecting the women's team to go further and potentially challenge for a championship run, whereas the men's, I didn't really expect them to do much. Conversely, BYU men's are expected to challenge for at least a championship run or close to it, whereas the men weren't. So we decided to just kind of divide that way, right? Sadly, this is the first men's basketball tournament I've missed in, quite a long time, maybe a decade. So there's some FOMO happening right now where, I really would love to be there and experience this. But from a logistic standpoint, it didn't make sense for two of us to be at the men's tournament when it didn't make sense, essentially, budgetary reasons. So with that standpoint and with everything, I ended up being the only media member for the women's tournament, at least for the first few rounds. I was left to ask a bunch of the questions as well as maybe some Big 12 staff. which is, unfortunate. These women deserve a lot more respect and getting that. With that said, there was a few games that had a lot of fans show out, especially an Iowa State game. It's a close driving distance, and so you get a lot of people that show out for these types of things, and kudos to that fan base for being able to come out and experience that. Anyways, so as part of this, I didn't get to experience fully what the Big 12 tournament is about. Like I said, the women's tournament just doesn't have the same, so unfortunately I don't get to see that. Well, as part of this, a lot of the debate intensified over Kansas City being the better destination than Las Vegas. And look, I'm not necessarily a Las Vegas person. I don't drink, and so going to Vegas isn't necessarily like the biggest allure to me. I know that's a big point to being in Vegas. Obviously, the gambling, the entertainment. But my point here is, going to Las Vegas, there's an opportunity where you've got your games, and if you wanted to stay there, it's great, right? You can be able to stay and watch the games. You're all in the same venue. So, for example, when it was in the MGM Grand, you could stay at the MGM Grand or the likewise properties, New York, those kinds of things. Be within walking distance. You're all in the same spot. The teams are all in that same spot. They don't have to go anywhere. This is kind of this one-stop shop for everything, right? And so you can get the full basketball experience. And, from a Utah side, when Utah was really good, the Utah fans showed out, and there was always a rivalry between trying to show out against Arizona fans, which always, beat everybody. Oregon probably came the next closest in trying to beat out Arizona fans, but there was a good showing from Arizona every year. Oregon had a good showing. When Utah was good, they would have a good showing just because it's so close. But for the most part, this was a great opportunity for different teams close by to be able to represent in Las Vegas, a place where there's a lot of entertainment. And that was kind of the point of that too. Beyond it being a one-stop shop, you could have everything there, right? If you wanted to go gambling, you could go there. If you wanted to drink, you had all the drinks right there. You had the games all right there. But if in the off chance that you didn't want to have basketball, because, some people want to go and they want to experience other things, you had a plethora of entertainment options to be able to go to, right? Las Vegas, there's a million things that you can do. And so there was a great opportunity for fans that decided to make that trip where they could do that. And if you wanted to go catch, let's say, the West Coast Conference, which happened a week before, you could do that. You've also got the Mountain West Conference where you could go check out that. There's some other different things going on. A lot of times there's also a rodeo going on. Sometimes there's NASCAR going on. There's a lot that goes on in Las Vegas. And so for fans that are coming down there, you have an opportunity to be able to look at a billion things, right? It's not just basketball. It can be a full immersive experience in Las Vegas where you just hang out, have fun, go to the pool, whatever it may be, right? Kansas City is a little bit different, right? Obviously, it's more centralized for Big 12 people. That's not to say that it is central it is central in the sense that it's in the middle of the country, and so really anybody can get to it, right? Las Vegas definitely is not an area that is conducive to the rest of the Big 12. I understand that, right? Like, I get that. It would be great for, the Four Corner schools, BYU included in there, but you'd have other schools, let's say West Virginia, UCF, all these rest of these schools that would have to travel much further to be able to get to the destination. So I understand that. That is harder for fans, especially those that have experienced Kansas City forever and being able to do that. Well, the difference here in Kansas City is, yes, it is a centralized location. It's another great arena. As I was pointed out many times in my tweets or in tweets directed toward me, it's an indoor sport. It's in an arena. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, I understand that. It is a great location in the sense that there's a million things to do around the arena. It's right in the heart of Kansas City. There's a lot of food choices. They have a great entertainment district kind of in that area. And so it's a great opportunity for fans that want to come to it, right? There's a lot of great local support. They have a lot of fan fest type stuff that goes on the street next door. It's a great opportunity. And so for those fans that are part of the Big 12 and who really enjoy basketball, this is a great venue. And I'm not denying any of that, right? Like, this is a great opportunity for them. This is a great situation where basketball is king. You're going to Kansas City for basketball and nothing else. And so from that vantage point, if that's what you're there for, it's a great opportunity, right? You get your food, you get your fun, you can still get your alcohol if that's what, you're looking for. You can also have your entertainment. There's other things that you can do, but it's just a different level than what Las Vegas is, right? This is very much so you're there for basketball and you can come watch some really entertaining basketball that quite honestly was much better or is much better than what the Pac-12 offered, right? The Pac-12 generally offered a few teams at the top, but for the rest, it was kind of a diluted conference that just didn't really have the same support. Whereas in the Big 12, there is a huge amount of support and excitement around it. And so with that, you've got the Big 12 tournament signed through 2031. Brett Yormark is speaking actually as I do this podcast, so there may be a conversation about it extending beyond that. The point being, they're not moving away from Kansas City. I know Brett Yormark has talked about trying to expand the reach of the conference in different areas, mostly through football. You are having these games being played in Las Vegas. They want to have some in California. There was even talk early on about Mexico before that kind of got pulled away. And so there's conversations being had about different things that way. With that said, the Big 12 tournament is staying in Kansas City. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like my tweet was not directed at this as being a bad situation, even though it did get the Kansas City Sports Commission president to comment to my tweet. Stories were written about it. This is kind of where it is. There's a lot of love for Kansas City, the Big 12 tournament, and what that brings. So at the same time, you've got these rivalry locations, right? And they're not ultimately because they're not leaving Kansas City. But I think there's a lot of people that are frustrated that some of these four corner schools, and Utah gets the rap for this, that they wanted to be able to have this in Las Vegas. And like I said, I'm not exactly a Las Vegas person. It's close, and so it's easy for me. I do like the one-stop shop area where I can just kind of stay in one area. It is a great venue. It's very similar to the T-Mobile Center. It's the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. And so they're the same thing, essentially, right? Like you're getting this. You still have a lot of opportunities right there by the arena to be able to have a fan fest. If anything, it's a bigger area, more open. Fans can do a lot of things. So there's a lot of similarities here. The difference being that most people hadn't experienced what a Las Vegas tournament could be, right? And so it's an interesting situation to be able to have both of these in there. And depending on what side of the aisle you are, you can look at these and say, this is the only way to do it. At the end of the day, yes, it is a basketball tournament that's played in an indoor venue. It doesn't really matter the location. The point being, there is massive amount of support. And in Kansas City, if there's going to be a lot of people in driving distance, that makes it a great opportunity. So, the venue itself is really interesting. I find it fascinating that people are so passionate about, where the location is. But Big 12 fans, this is kind of what they get up for, right? Basketball is king. This is what they want. As I was told many times, they don't need other entertainment because basketball is what they're there for. I get that, right? I understand that. Based on my experience covering the Pac-12, there was a lot of people that wanted to do more than just watch basketball. Quite honestly, if your team is playing, you're there for it. Beyond that, other teams, you're not watching as much, right? You may have the very passionate ones that want to stand there and, watch every session and do different things that way. But for the most part, people want to have other experiences. And so, whether you land on the Las Vegas venue, whether you land on Kansas City venue, that's up to you. One thing I will say as part of this is, and this was tweeted today by Jeff Goodman, he tweeted a picture of where the media was put up in Kansas City. And for the women's tournament, I had great access. I had very similar access to what I had at the Pac-12, where you're right on the baseline and you're able to see the game in a much better situation than, quite honestly, I get at the University of Utah, where I'm up a few levels at the top of the concourse, and I'm kind of removed a little bit from the game. Tournament time is a great opportunity because you get to be able to be on the floor. You get to be able to see these teams, see how they're reacting. Years ago, I got an opportunity to cover, Utah when they were in the Sweet 16. I'm watching Utah contest against Duke, and I'm sitting, a few rows away from Mike Krzyzewski and Larry Kraskowiak, going at it and being able to coach for their lives in this game to head to the Elite Eight. And for me as a media member, it's obviously a great experience for me. I loved basketball. That was a great opportunity to be able to kind of be in that mix and be able to see it. But more than anything, as a media member, my job is to be able to be the middleman for you as a fan. And the more context that I can give and the more opportunities that I can help you understand the situations behind something, the better. Unfortunately, our media landscape today is very different than what it was even then, where there's a lot of people that are just trying to get clout. They're just trying to be the first person out there to put it on Twitter or Instagram or any social platform, right? They're trying to chase clout, and they're trying to do different things that way. They're trying to get videos that go viral so that they can kind of build their own brand and do different things that way. And so you've lost a lot of what real true journalism is, where you're trying to be kind of the middleman for the fans, where you're the one that gets the special access to be able to see things and give fans something that's different than what they can watch on TV. Unfortunately, what a lot of journalism has turned into is just basically rewatching what everybody else is watching, trying to do something that way. Yeah, you get to talk to the coaches and the players after, but even then, there's a lot of people that don't want to ask the tough questions, right? The whole point of this is what I'm saying is when you get that close access, you get another experience on how the game is played. For example, watching Mike Krzyzewski on TV, you don't get to watch the full experience of his emotions, right? Sometimes he looks pretty passive. He just looks like he's sitting there and letting his players do things. When in reality, you watch that game and he's up and down constantly and he's screaming and he's getting his team moving and he's actively involved in that game. That gives me great... we call it color, right? You give you some more of the narrative to be able to put in there where I can explain the situations, where I can understand what he's saying because I can hear him yelling to his players and saying, do this, do that. To me, whenever I get that opportunity to be able to be close to the bench, it allows me to be able to understand the game at a higher level, right? When I'm standing up at the concourse and sitting there watching a game, there's no difference than me necessarily watching it from TV. I can see some things, and sometimes TV actually provides a better view because you get some things that are said that I can't see from my vantage point. But when I'm down there on the floor and I get an opportunity to have that, then I get to give you guys the context. And so when we get that context, you guys win as fans because then I can provide you more information. Yes, there's sourcing and other stuff that I do that can kind of get there, but that's a lot of work to be able to get something that is still sometimes speculative. When I'm sitting there close to a game and you get to understand things at a higher level, then it allows my reporting to be better to give you guys the interest there. Coming full circle here, the Jeff Goodman tweet, he showed that they were very high up because there's a lot of people that are in there. There's a lot of people, that they want to sell out a lot of these venues and they want to give it to high donor people to put them closer to the bench, and then you shift the media all the way to the top. There's no advantage to going to Kansas City because there is, your fan base is way high up or your media is way high up, right? I get no different viewpoint watching it on TV versus watching it where it is in Kansas City. Whereas in Vegas, and look, this is a difference, right? Like if the Pac-12 had a larger fan base in terms of support, this would have been a similar situation. So I'm not trying to dog this in the situation on Kansas City, but this is what the nature of it is when you start getting more support, you lose access to the people that are doing the job. Yeah, we've got the post-game press conferences, but anybody that's been to a press conference understand that that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? You're just getting really basic stuff that don't really matter. You want to be able to get the insight that helps. And so I think from that vantage point, that is missed, right? You miss that opportunity where I would say it's a more intimate experience where you get the opportunity to understand what's going on fully. And so anytime you push the media out, you lose that. It becomes a disservice to the fans. And that's the point of this, right? Like, I know nobody's going to cry for the media, and that's not what I'm trying to say here. But I think at the end of the day, we keep putting these situations out where the media gets tossed aside, right? And then as a relation to that, you as a fan don't get to be privy to the information. All through the football season, for example, I had a million people tweeting at me to be able to get different information about different things, right? Easier said than done. But when there's opportunities where, we get to watch practice, and I'm not saying, that we got all the great insight from practice, but I think when you get little things like that, little things that allow us to have an inside look at what is going on with a program, it gives you as a media member the opportunity to be able to know firsthand what's happening. I can get the general vibe of a team. I can get the general sense of how things are going, right? Instead, you just get the boilerplate stuff of the coaches sitting there saying what they want to say. And so then things get diluted down to whatever the fans want. How does this all relate to Kansas City and everything and the debate that there is? I don't know, right? Like, it all comes kind of full circle. The point that I'm trying to make is, it gives you the opportunity when you have something where you can kind of be close to the environment. That helps, right? And so then the reporting helps that gets the interest, that gets everything going on. So wherever you stand on where this tournament should be played doesn't ultimately matter. It's in Kansas City. It's not changing. I stepped in it a little bit and found out that how passionate Big 12 fans are, which I love. I love that Big 12 fans are passionate, because you did not get that in the Pac-12. You had a few fan bases, like I said, Oregon, Arizona, UCLA if they were good. Utah when they were good obviously was involved in that. There's much more passion. And I think that should be something that Utah fans should embrace, especially as you're hoping that this new era of the Utah basketball team will improve. And you can be involved in that mix, and you can go down to Kansas City and enjoy it the same way that everybody else is. I can't imagine there's a lot of Utah fans heading to Kansas City this week, just simply based on kind of the nature of where this team is at. And so I think this will be a fun opportunity where, look, whether it's played in Las Vegas or Kansas City, I don't think it matters. I think if Utah becomes good, there will be a lot of fans that want to embrace Kansas City. It's a great town, right? Like, I'm not trying to say any disparaging things about it, because it is great. I hope that people understand what I'm saying here is that, there's a lot of options, right? And I think there's reasons why different conferences have moved things around, because they want to try to get some excitement in different areas, right? The Big Ten is going to Las Vegas for one season to be able to kind of help cater to some of the fans on the West and kind of move that around and be able to keep it so that there's other fan bases that get interested in it, right? The Big 12 isn't going to do that. It's going to stay. There's nothing bad about that. Like I said, there's nothing disparaging about what I've said in terms of that. I think it is a great location. There's a great local support. It's a great venue to be able to host that, especially as the weather is probably similar to Kansas or to Las Vegas right now. It's a great opportunity. So we'll leave it at that. That was a lot of conversation about all that. Kind of went a little sideways sometimes. I'm sorry for that. But let's jump in a little bit to the Runnin Utes preview. The Runnin Utes do play tonight if you're listening to this on Tuesday. This is their first round game against UCF. This is a game where when they traveled to Florida, this should have been one of those games that Utah won, right? And ultimately, it was kind of the decider on cutting Craig Smith loose. Utah had already decided that this was going to be the case. UCF just kind of gave a perfect opportunity where Utah lost a game that it should have won, and it became an easy break point for Utah to kind of move forward. In retrospect, as I mentioned, Utah was already in the works of being able to kind of let go of Craig Smith, right? I think beating Kansas and Kansas State kind of delayed the inevitable, simply because you can't really fire somebody. You can, right? Like, you can, but it would be bad optics to be able to fire somebody immediately after two big wins. And so losing to UCF gave it easy opportunity to be able to say, okay, we're done. The reasoning for that essentially is there was a lot of conversations had behind the scenes with Alex Jensen to see if he was interested. The boosters, were excited for this. They wanted to be able to make sure this worked. And so the timing of this made sense to be able to hire Alex Jensen, knowing that he was your number one guy, but at least knowing that he was number one guy, that you knew going into it that it was going to be much easier, right? This wasn't going to be one of those things where it was a hope and a prayer and you were going to let go of a guy without really knowing what the outcome is going to be. And so this is kind of, I don't know if you want to call it the retribution game. I don't think there's anything to this at this point. I think there's, Utah is just trying to do whatever it can to maintain its season as long as it can. Somebody like Gabe Madsen, a Lawson Lovering, they want to be able to play as long as they possibly can. And so this is an opportunity for Utah to be able to kind of keep that dream alive. The reality is unless Utah goes on some miraculous run, obviously there's no NCAA tournament bid. There's most likely not even an NIT bid in the case. Maybe there is something if they go deep. I doubt it. But beyond that, Utah's postseason is resting on whatever happens tonight and moving forward, right? And so this UCF team, as I've mentioned before, they have a lot of talent. Their record hasn't necessarily reflected that, but this is a team that is much better than its record. They have talent, probably much more talent than what Utah has. And so looking at this, Utah comes in as a higher seeded team, but at the same time, they're not necessarily, a better team, if that makes sense, all around. That's not to say that Utah can't. These tournaments have always been kind of an interesting situation for Utah, especially the last few years, where some years it's just Utah's trying to, just be done with the season. They're kind of hobbling along and kind of moving forward and trying to do whatever they can, but ultimately they're a broken team that is just ready for the end to come. That's not necessarily this Utah team. This team is still fully engaged to each other. They play for each other. They work well with each other. That's not to say it's still the perfect product out there. But at the same time, this is a team that works well together in and of itself. They haven't worked well together in terms of, a lot of turnovers and different things that way, right? Like there's a lot of fundamental stuff that are still frustrating to watch. But at the same time, this is a team that's still playing together and they want to continue to win. So with that being said, I expect Utah to be able to put forth their best effort. Whether that's actually going to matter, we'll see. You saw them come into an emotional game against BYU, and they played really well in the first half and did what they could to be able to beat a BYU team that started 0-13 from three-point range, right? And even then, once BYU started to hit those three-pointers, it kind of changed the game. But Utah fought to the very end, right? They got down by 14. It looked over. I mean, there was no hope in that second half necessarily, and yet Utah continued to fight, got it down to 7, found a way to be able to continue to stay engaged. But the point there being, this is a team that, unless they ultimately just want this season to end, I really do believe that they're going to try to go into this game and fight. Now, with that said, I could see it being one of those things where if early adversity hits, Utah just kind of says, we're done. We're going to mail it in, look to our future. Some of these players are going to look to transfer. They're going to look to kind of make sense of what's going on with a new coaching staff. Others are graduating, and, this is the end for them. So curious to see what this game entails. If Utah does beat UCF, they will meet up with Kansas tomorrow night. Yes, you have beat Kansas before, but I think this is a tougher task for Utah. Once again, this team has to play near perfect. It doesn't have to be fully perfect, but at the same time, like you have to get a full team investment, and you have to play as a team. You got to move the ball. You've got to work together, not turn over the ball. That's how this Utah team wins. And if they can do that, yeah, they could make a run. Yeah, you can beat UCF. You can beat Kansas because you have before, right? You're not going to have your fan base there to support you in the sense that it was at the Huntsman Center, a great raucous crowd that's going to kind of be behind you. You're going to have a far different environment where Kansas is going to be the one that's going to have more fans in Kansas City and being able to support it. So you're essentially playing a road game that's going to be a very tall task. Man, I can't even say what I just said there, but a tall task for Utah. But assuming that Utah can get past UCF and Kansas, you then run into the gauntlet that they've always run into, and that's Arizona. So a run isn't necessarily in the cards for Utah. But look, any extra games that Utah can get, great. If you can get to the second day, that's a great opportunity for Utah because quite honestly, they just don't do that lately. They've come in and they haven't been great in these tournaments and they lose in the first round. Even when they're picked as the higher seed, they find a way to squander it. Similarly to what the women did last week, come in with these doubt us t-shirts and ended up being doubted. So it wasn't a great look. It's one of those situations that didn't bode well for Utah. So curious to see what happens tonight. Beyond that, it turns into the Alex Jensen era, right? I know a lot of fans have already turned into that. They really want to see what's going on there, just kind of end this season and move forward. Alex Jensen is going to stay with the Mavericks to the end of the season, but the way that the Mavericks are playing, there's really no hope for them to get in the playoffs, barring some magical run. Even then, I don't expect them to last long in the playoffs. So you should be getting Alex Jensen here soon as a full-time person. With that said, the Mavericks have done everything they can to allow Alex to have what he needs to be able to help him ramp up as the head coach of Utah. So he's still working on being able to hire assistants. He's working on trying to shore up a roster, that kind of stuff. And so we'll see kind of in the next few days/weeks what that looks like. We still haven't gotten a formal press conference with him. I am assuming, based on conversations that I've had, that wouldn't happen until after this tournament run. It's kind of tough to be able to do that when Utah is still fully invested in their team. And so it's probably going to take place next week, maybe at the end of this week if things, go out the way that we expect. Still TBD. So we'll find out. Really curious to kind of hear his perspective on what he wants to do at Utah, kind of what his touch points are, like what his focus is going to be. So I think that's going to be a really interesting situation once that comes about. As I've talked about with staffing, Andre Miller is kind of the hot name that everybody's talking about. I know that there is interest from Miller to want to come back. Whether that's an assistant coach or another capacity remains to be seen. I know there's been talk about Josh Grant, former Ute player as well, being in the mix. I've talked about potentially keeping Josh Eilert and David Evans from the current staff. I think that would be a great situation. Josh Eilert, for the fact that he understands the Big 12, and for a new coach that's coming into the collegiate game who hasn't been here for, 15 years or whatever it is. You need somebody that understands the Big 12 at a high level. Not saying that Josh Eilert is the only guy that understands that, but if you can get a guy that's been in the Utah system for a year, understands kind of the Utah culture a little bit from that experience, understands what is going on there in the Big 12, I think that he becomes a valuable asset if he wants to stay. And what he's able to do with coaching, the players, I think has been a great situation. He's a beloved coach. I think he, has the opportunity to be able to be a great asset for Utah if they want. And then, lastly with David Evans, he's been in the state for a long time. He's coached a lot of players at the high school ranks. He understands the environment here. He understands recruiting at a high level. Also is a great coach in just being able to help players and help them develop and be improved in what they do. I think you could round out that coaching staff with guys that Alex Jensen knows and trust, whether that be Andre Miller or some other guys. But you also get some current guys that will be able to help you that way. So fascinated to see how this goes. I'm going to keep this one a little bit short today, but I want to look forward to kind of looking at the current roster in a next podcast and see, who would be the most valuable assets to keep. I've given my list, just kind of top of mind of who I think Utah should go after, but I think there's, looking at these advanced stats where you could kind of see who becomes the most valuable. And if Utah is going to operate this in a similar vein to how football does, where you value certain positions or value certain things, and then you put a monetary value to that, I'm curious to see what Utah does. Obviously, that's going to be dependent on how Alex Jensen approaches the game. Is he going to go, bigs heavy? Like Craig Smith really wanted to be able to have post players. He wanted to have those guys where you could work inside out, right? Is Alex Jensen going to be a little bit more similar to what the current environment is, where it's a lot more based on guard play and being able to rely on great shooters from the perimeter who can distribute the ball. Is he going to get into the current era of college basketball / basketball in general, or what's his game going to look like? So I think, we'll get a better look of that. I think once we understand that, that'll help us understand a little bit more of what his recruiting is going to look like. I will say that as part of this, having him rebuild an entire roster of 15 players is a tall task, right? Like trying to be able to rebuild that and then get Utah to be competitive in the Big 12 next year and challenge for an NCAA tournament berth, that's a tall task. And so they've got to put some interest / effort in trying to maintain some of the guys that are currently on the roster just for some consistency's sake and stability. But that also goes both ways, where these players are going to enter the transfer portal. They're going to look for their best options, and they've got to do what's best for themselves as well. So really curious to see what Utah does here, what the players do, and we'll kind of see what happens there. But for the most part, there's still a lot to go. We'll talk about these things, and we'll get into the numbers and break it down a little bit more to kind of see who would be some of the more valuable assets to keep. But we'll check into that. We'll see if I can do a podcast at the end of this week, depending on how Utah does in the tournament, and kind of weigh in on that before we get to talk more about the Alex Jensen era. And then we head into spring football. So we're getting into that. We're getting close. We've got a lot of still talk about, and looking forward to that. So with that, we'll sign off today, and I hope you guys have a great day.